She stood by the window and said, without turning around, "I can't be intimate with you anymore." Her tone was so even, it sounded like she was reading the weather. I did not answer. I just walked out of the room. A week later, I overheard her best friend, Lauren, and realized she had been looking at me differently for a long time. Rachel and I had been together for 12 years. In the beginning, it was late nights on the couch, road trips just to get ice cream, and walks at odd hours because neither of us could sleep. We would laugh about the smallest things. Even arguments back then felt like proof that we cared enough to fight. I believed that kind of connection would never fade if we kept showing up for each other. It did not vanish overnight. First, it was the way she came to bed later than me. Then how she started taking her phone everywhere, even to the bathroom. She said she needed more personal space, more time for herself. I thought maybe I had been too present, too involved. So I started pulling back, thinking she would miss me and come closer again. But the gap between us only widened. She stopped touching me except for quick, absent pats on the arm. At first, I told myself it was just stress from work or family. I thought of the years we had built together, the trips, the inside jokes, the promises whispered in the dark, and I held on to them like proof that we were still us. But it was becoming harder to remember the last time she had looked at me the way she used to. When she told me she could not be intimate anymore, I felt my stomach tighten, but my mind go quiet. There was no argument, no demand for an explanation. I did not ask if she was seeing someone else. I did not ask if this was permanent. Part of me already knew the answer would not change anything. In the days after, we moved around each other like strangers sharing a space. She left early in the morning, came home late, and filled the silence with casual updates about her day. I nodded, gave short answers, and went to bed before her. It was easier than pretending nothing had changed. Still, there was a part of me that waited for some kind of turning point, a moment when she would touch my hand, or tell me she missed us, or ask if we could talk. That moment never came. Instead, I found myself watching her from the doorway when she did not notice. The woman I knew was still there, but buried under something I could not reach. I kept thinking about those first years, how she used to pull me out the door at midnight to get milkshakes, how she once called in sick just so we could spend the day in bed watching old movies. It made me believe I could find a way back to that. But every time I tried to start a real conversation, she would smile politely and say she was tired. And so, I stopped trying. In that space between what we were and what we had become, I could feel the weight of something I could not name. I thought it was just a phase. I thought if I stayed, if I waited long enough, we would come back to each other. I did not know then that the distance had already become permanent. I decided to change the only thing I could control, myself. I started with my clothes. I got rid of the old t-shirts I had been wearing for years and bought button-downs and new jeans. I switched to running shoes and started jogging every morning before work. The routine gave me something to focus on that was not her silence. I began cooking dinners instead of ordering takeout. Some nights I would set the table with candles, hoping she would see it as an invitation. She would thank me, sit down, and eat quietly, her eyes fixed on her plate or her phone. The conversation never moved beyond how her day went or what she needed to do tomorrow. I tried to bring back small traditions we had left behind. One Friday, I suggested we go for a drive like we used to. She said she was too tired. The next weekend, I mentioned going to the farmer's market. She said she had errands to run alone. It was like pushing against a locked door. No matter how hard I tried, it did not budge. Still, I convinced myself that effort meant something. I told myself she was noticing, even if she did not say it. If I kept showing her that I was paying attention, she might remember why she had chosen me in the first place. I ignored the fact that her smile no longer reached her eyes. I started leaving her small notes before work, just a few words on a sticky pad. Have a good day. Dinner tonight at 7. Thinking about you. Some mornings, they were gone when I came home. Other times, they sat untouched on the counter. I also stopped asking her to explain how she felt. The last time I had tried, she told me she needed space and time to figure things out. So I stepped back, hoping the distance would make her want to come closer again. But she seemed relieved, as if less of me was exactly what she wanted. Friends noticed the change before I was willing to admit it. One asked if everything was okay. I said we were just in a rough patch. It was easier than admitting that every attempt I made seemed to push her further away. I told myself it was temporary, that couples go through this all the time. On some nights, when she fell asleep early, I sat in the living room and went over every detail of the past few months. Was it something I said? Something I failed to do? I kept thinking that if I could just find the one wrong step, I could fix it. But the more I searched, the more it felt like I was chasing something that was no longer there. In the end, I decided the only thing left was to wait. Give her time, give her space, let her see I was not going anywhere. I told myself that holding on quietly was still a kind of strength. I did not realize that it was also the easiest way to lose her completely. Lauren, Rachel's best friend, started coming over more often. Sometimes she would bring coffee or a bottle of wine, sometimes nothing at all. She would sit at the kitchen counter while Rachel cooked or answer emails, and the two of them would talk about people I did not know. It was easy to ignore at first. Lauren had always been around, but I noticed small changes. When she spoke to me, she held my gaze longer than before. Her jokes landed differently, as if they were meant just for me. Rachel seemed not to notice, or maybe she did and chose to ignore it. One Saturday, they were supposed to meet for lunch. Rachel got a call and said she needed to run to the store first. I was in the living room when Lauren came in without knocking, holding a bag from the bakery. She asked if Rachel was ready, and when I told her she had stepped out, she lingered instead of leaving. We talked for a few minutes about nothing important, work, the weather, how she had just moved apartments. Then her phone rang. She walked into the hallway and lowered her voice, but the sound carried. "I don't get how she can just pull away like that," she said. I froze, unsure if she was talking about Rachel. There was a pause, then her voice softened. "He deserves more than this." I could not hear the reply, only her quiet laugh before she ended the call and walked back into the room. Her expression was calm, almost casual, as if she had not said anything worth remembering. I wanted to ask her what she meant, but the words caught in my throat. If she was talking about me, then she had noticed more than I wanted anyone to see. If she was talking about someone else, then asking would expose how much I had been listening. Instead, I nodded when she said she would wait for Rachel outside. After she left, I sat in the same chair for a long time. The sound of her voice kept replaying in my head, each word heavier the more I thought about it. Maybe I was imagining it. Maybe the weight in her tone was something I invented because I needed to believe someone still saw me. But the tightening in my chest would not go away. That night, Rachel mentioned nothing about her lunch with Lauren. She said she was tired and went to bed early. I lay awake, wondering if Lauren had told her anything. I wondered if Rachel had talked about me in a way she would never say to my face. In the days after, I caught myself watching Lauren differently when she was around. I was looking for signs, a glance too long, a choice of words that might mean more. The more I noticed, the less certain I became about what was real and what I wanted to believe. But I knew one thing. I had not imagined the way her voice changed when she said I deserved more. A few days later, Rachel told me she was going on a girls' weekend. She said it like it was nothing, already packing a small suitcase before I could ask who else was going. I nodded and wished her a good trip, even though I felt that familiar gap open wider. That Friday night, the house was quiet. I made myself dinner and was cleaning up when the doorbell rang. When I opened it, Lauren was standing there, holding a pie in both hands. She smiled and said it was just because. I stepped aside and let her in. She set the pie on the counter, looking around like she was checking if Rachel might appear from another room. We sat at the kitchen table with mugs of tea. At first, the conversation stayed light, work updates, small talk about the neighborhood. But then she leaned back slightly and asked, "You do know this isn't about you, right?" She just decided to step back. I looked at her, but said nothing. Her eyes stayed on mine, steady and unflinching. It was the kind of look you hold when you want the other person to believe every word. When I did not answer, she reached across the small gap and placed her hand on my shoulder. Her voice dropped, softer now. "If you were mine, I would never let you go." The words hung there between us, and neither of us moved. I could feel the heat from her hand even after she pulled it back. There was no smirk, no sign she was joking. She took another sip of tea like nothing had happened. I stood to collect the empty mugs, needing to put some distance between us. But the sound of her voice replayed in my head, each syllable hitting harder than the last. She had not just crossed a line, she had erased it. We did not talk about it any further. When she left, she gave a quick goodbye and walked out into the night without looking back. I closed the door and stood there, unsure what to do with the mix of guilt and something else I could not name. Rachel texted me later to say she had arrived safely. I typed out a reply and deleted it twice before settling on a short good. I did not mention Lauren's visit. That night, the house felt different. Not because Rachel was gone. That had happened before, but because someone else had stepped into the space she had left. And in the quiet, I could still hear Lauren's words, clear and deliberate. If you were mine, I would never let you go. I stayed in the kitchen after she left, staring at the pie she had brought. It sat untouched, the foil still folded neatly over the edges. I was not hungry, but I cut a small slice and ate it standing up, more to keep my hands busy than anything else. Her words kept looping in my head. It had not sounded like a line meant to stir trouble. It had sounded like a fact, like she had thought it through before saying it out loud. I tried to tell myself it was harmless, just a moment, just words. But that was not true. No one says something like that without meaning it, and no one forgets hearing it. I went into the living room and turned on the TV, flipping through channels without registering what was on. I was thinking about all the times in the past months I had felt invisible, and how in one sentence she had made me feel seen again. That was the part one could not shake. It was not about wanting Lauren. It was about wanting to believe someone could still look at me that way. Rachel had not in a long time, and I had stopped expecting her to. I thought about texting Rachel just to check in, but I knew it would be met with a short answer. Instead, I poured another cup of tea and sat at the table, staring at my phone without unlocking it. Lauren's voice was still there, every word clear. I told myself I was not going to act on it. I was not going to cross that line, even if she already had. But the truth was, the line between us had already shifted the second she put her hand on my shoulder. When I finally went to bed, I lay in the dark replaying the scene over and over. The kitchen light, the steam from our mugs, her eyes steady on mine. I could feel the weight of it even with my eyes closed. I wondered if she regretted saying it, or if she was somewhere thinking about my reaction. Maybe she had been waiting for me to say something back, to test if I felt the same. But I had stayed quiet, and now the silence was just as loaded as her words. By the time I drifted off, it was well past midnight. When I woke up the next morning, the pie was still on the counter, half covered, like an unfinished sentence. Rachel would be home tomorrow, and I knew I would see Lauren again eventually. I told myself it did not have to mean anything, but I also knew that for the first time in a long time, someone had made me feel like I mattered, and that was not something I could easily forget. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, the scene replayed, her hand on my shoulder, her voice low, the certainty in her words. It was not desire that kept me awake. It was the fact that I could not remember the last time anyone had spoken to me like that. By the time Rachel came home the next day, I was running on a few hours of restless sleep. She rolled her suitcase inside, set her bag down, and told me the trip was fine. I asked a couple of questions, but her answers were short, distracted. It felt like we were having two different conversations. Hers was about the surface. Mine was about what we were avoiding. When she hugged me, it was quick and without weight. I told myself not to compare it to anything, but my mind went there anyway. The contrast was sharp, and I hated myself for noticing. We spent the rest of the evening in the same house, but not together. She watched a show in the bedroom. I stayed in the living room scrolling through my phone. The pie Lauren had brought was still in the fridge. Rachel did not ask where it came from. Later, I stood in the doorway of the bedroom and watched her for a moment. She was propped up against the headboard, eyes on the screen, not even glancing when I came in. It hit me then. Whatever we had before, we had already lost. We were just moving through the motions because neither of us had said it out loud yet. Lying next to her that night, I could hear the faint sound of the TV from the living room, still on from when I left it. I stared at the ceiling, feeling the space between us stretch wider. She turned away from me in her sleep, and I stayed awake until the numbers on the clock blurred. The next morning, She left early for work without saying much. I stood in the kitchen alone, the silence thick around me. There was no anger in it, just absence, the kind that does not leave room for repair. I realized I had not thought about fixing things since Lauren's visit. Not because I wanted Lauren, but because something in me had shifted. It was like a part of me had already stopped waiting for Rachel to turn back toward me. That day, I went through the motions, answered emails, ran errands, made dinner, but none of it felt connected to her anymore. She came home late and said she had already eaten. We exchanged a few words, and then she disappeared into the bedroom. I sat at the table long after she closed the door, listening to the faint sound of water running in the shower. I knew then that we were done, even if neither of us had said the words. And the strangest part was how quiet that realization felt. 2 days later, I decided to tell her. Not everything, not how it had made me feel, but enough to put it out in the open. We were in the kitchen after dinner, her rinsing a plate, me leaning against the counter. I said, "Lauren came by while you were gone." She did not react, just kept running water over the dish. I added, "She said things to me, things you probably would not want her saying." That got her attention. She set the plate down, turned to face me. "What things?" she asked, her tone flat. I repeated it exactly, word for word, so she would hear it the way I had. Her expression barely changed. When I finished, she shrugged. "Do whatever you want. I told you I do not want to be with you." It was like she was stating the weather. No anger, no surprise, no fight. I stood there for a few seconds, waiting for her to say something else. Anything. But she turned back to the sink and kept washing dishes as if the conversation was over. I wanted to push back, to ask if she even cared. But the truth was, her answer had already told me. It was not permission, it was indifference. I walked out of the kitchen and into the living room, but I could still hear the sound of water running. It struck me that I had been expecting her to at least pretend to care. Instead, she had made it clear she was already somewhere else in her mind. I sat on the couch for a long time, staring at nothing. Her words, "Do whatever you want," kept replaying, not as freedom, but as proof she had stopped seeing me as part of her life. The thought landed heavier than I expected. Later that night, we moved around the house like strangers again. She brushed her teeth while I sat on the edge of the bed. We got under the covers at the same time, but did not touch. I realized then that I had been holding on to something she had already let go of. The question now was not whether we could fix it. It was whether I was willing to keep pretending. And I did not know the answer yet. The next morning, I woke up before her. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the steam rising from the cup. Her words from the night before were still fresh, not sharp, just final. When she came into the kitchen, she looked at me like I was just another part of the room. She poured herself coffee, scrolled through her phone, and left without saying anything more than a quiet bye. It felt less like living together and more like sharing a hallway in an apartment building. I thought about Lauren again, about the look in her eyes when she told me she would never let me go. It hit me then. The problem was never about her, or what she had said. The problem was that Rachel had been gone from this marriage for a long time, and I had been standing still, waiting for her to come back. I tried to think back to the last time Rachel had truly been present with me. The timeline blurred. Every memory from the past year seemed laced with her pulling away, making space, keeping a distance I could not close. It was not that I suddenly wanted to be with Lauren. It was that her words had ripped away the last excuse I had been holding on to. The idea that if I just waited long enough, Rachel would turn toward me again. Now I knew she would not. By the time Rachel came home that evening, I had made up my mind about one thing. I was done waiting. I did not tell her that yet, but I carried it with me like a quiet decision no one else could see. She asked if I had eaten. I said yes. We spent the evening in separate rooms again, the house filled with the hum of the TV and the faint tapping of her typing on her phone. There was no tension, but there was nothing else either. When I went to bed, she was already asleep. I lay there in the dark, listening to her steady breathing, and realized that I no longer felt the pull to reach for her. It was not anger. It was the absence of anything left to reach for. In that moment, I stopped imagining us fixing things. I stopped picturing her turning back toward me. And for the first time in months, I felt certain about what I had to do next. The next week, I filed for divorce. I did not tell Rachel the exact day I was going to do it. When the papers arrived, I set them on the kitchen table and left them there. She came home, glanced at the envelope, and opened it without a word. Her eyes moved over the pages. Then she set them down and walked to the bedroom. I stayed where I was, listening to her drawers open and close. She came back a few minutes later, holding her phone. "Do you want me to sign them now or later?" she asked. "Now," I said. She signed, slid the papers back to me, and went to the bedroom again. There was no argument, no scene, just the quiet scratch of a pen and the sound of her footsteps fading. It was the simplest ending to something that had once felt unbreakable. That night, I slept in the guest room. Not because we had agreed to it, but because it felt wrong to lie next to her after that. The bed was smaller, the mattress uneven, but I slept more soundly than I had in months. In the morning, she left early. Her coffee mug was in the sink, half full. I put it in the dishwasher without thinking. Over the next few days, we spoke only when necessary, about bills, about mail, about when she would start moving her things out. Lauren did not come by. I realized I no longer cared whether I saw her again or not. When Rachel finally left with the last of her boxes, the house felt heavier and lighter at the same time. I stood in the living room, looking at the empty space where her chair had been. There was no urge to fill it. I walked through each room once, not checking for anything she had forgotten, just seeing the place as it was now. In the kitchen, her key was still on the counter. I did not touch it. That night, I sat at the table with a plate of food I had cooked for one. There was no TV on, no phone in my hand. Only the sound of my own breathing in a house that no longer felt like ours. For the first time in a long time, the silence did not make me restless. It was not warm, but it was steady. And in its steadiness, there was more comfort than we had shared in years. Thanks for listening to the story till the end. Write in the comments what you think about all this. Subscribe. More untold stories are on the way.